On Saturday, the U.S. Military Academy's Cadet Chapel at West Point hosted its first same-sex marriage ceremony. It happened a little more than a year after President Obama ended the military's Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy. That same day, Republican Pennsylvania State Representative Mike Fleck announced that he was gay, becoming Pennsylvania's first openly gay lawmaker. Those milestones come as the Supreme Court is deciding whether to take up the issue of gay marriage this term. Before the justices are several cases, most of which challenge the Defense of Marriage Act. DOMA, as it is known, is the 1996 law enacted by President Clinton. It ordered the federal government to recognize only marriages between a man and a woman. In the intervening years since Clinton passed the law, American attitudes towards marriage equality have shifted dramatically. 2012 is set to go down as one of the most successful years ever for the gay rights movement. For the first time, marriage equality advocates won at the ballot box when 3 states, Maine, Maryland, and Washington, voted to join 6 other states plus the District of Columbia in permitting same-sex marriage. And of course, this was the year that President Obama became the first sitting president to publicly endorse gay marriage, a powerful sign that the once politically sensitive issue has moved firmly into the mainstream. Frank, you have, I thought, an incredibly moving and very compelling op-ed in this weekend's New York Times talking about DOMA. And the thing that struck me was just how far the country has come in a really relatively short period of time. Just because I was interested in comparing it to interracial marriage. In 1958, Gallup showed that 4% of the country approved of interracial marriage. By the late 1960s, it was 20%. In 1991, 48%, 97, 64%. Obviously, we've come a long way, but not nearly as quickly as we've come in terms of American attitudes on gay marriage. In 96, 27% of the country thought it should be legal. By 2012, that number was up to 50%. And, of course, all the movement we've seen at the state level.
It's astonishing. I mean, it's delighted, but it shocked me how fast this is going. I mean, this trend line is going in only one direction. I think that's one of the reasons the Supreme Court is taking its time to figure out what to do here. I think they feel they can't avoid the issue. We'll find out soon enough. But, I mean, there are, as we learned in the election, there are ways to look at polls and say, well, I see this, well, I see this. Nobody argues that when you look at polls about same-sex marriage that it's going on a line toward more and more support. Younger people, by huge margins, favor this. So that suggests that 10 years, 20 years, everybody knows our country is moving towards this inexorably. And the only question is, what are the very next steps?
And, well, you, in your open letter, I guess, to Bill Clinton, say it's time for you to apologize for what you did.
Yes.
DOMA was an unacceptable piece of legislation. It was distasteful then. It is beyond distasteful at this point. I'll read a little excerpt. And you put it in the context of Hillary running for office potentially in 2016. Hillary Clinton, like you, Bill Clinton, has been largely on the sidelines during this vital chapter in our country's march towards greater social justice. What a shame, given that no two people have been larger in the Democratic Party over the last quarter century, and given the party's deserved pride in its embrace of same-sex marriage now. The two of you should be a more integral part of that pride. You should be at the very epicenter of this. It's strange and it's sad that you're not.
It is sad to me. I think in Hillary's case, this moved a lot after she went into the Secretary of State job. There's a kind of etiquette and tradition of the Secretary of State not wading into domestic political matters. I shouldn't say frankly. I think
yes, you're definitely frankly.
I think that once Obama came out for this, I think even though she was Secretary of State, she's powerful, she's beloved enough. I think she could have said something. But she will say something as soon as she steps out of this job. Just kind of start your stopwatch. It's only a matter of minutes practically before Hillary Clinton makes explicit what's implicit now, which is that she, too, is with the Democratic Party in support of same-sex marriage.
You know, I think what's interesting, because I think who among us does not believe Jet Magazine is the arbiter of all things in popular taste? Jet Magazine had its first same-sex couple in its sort of wedding listing this month, which is actually a huge move, because a lot of people thought that in the African-American community there would be a huge backlash against President Obama coming out for gay marriage that would hurt him in the election. The opposite has happened, even within the African-American community, which is very religious and which has a high number of evangelicals. You've seen a movement in favor of gay marriage. So
a huge movement. In fact, a lot of the same-sex marriage advocates thought Maryland wouldn't be among the states that would do. They thought it would be Maine and it would be Washington, but not Maryland. And they thought Maryland wouldn't do it at the ballot box because it's about 30% African American. Maryland did it.
Frank, I'm curious why you think that President Bill Clinton has, since he has the freedom that Hillary doesn't, why hasn't he apologized for this, sorry to say it, stain on his legislative record?
I think he feels he has, because in 2009, before Obama, he said, in not a very expansive or hugely heartfelt way. He said, I'm now for marriage equality. Again, it was not a big statement. I think he feels like I did that. What more do I have to do? But I think DOMA is just such a nasty bit of legislation. It's codified bigotry. I think it calls for a much more robust statement than that.
And just to echo on this important divergence that Frank's identifying between these two Democratic presidents, President Obama's Justice Department did make the very unusual step of deciding not to defend the constitutionality of DOMA.
Yep.
Typically, the Justice Department defends everything because it is, in a sense, the lawyer of the laws of the land. But here, they do have the discretion to do otherwise. They did otherwise. It makes a big difference because as the courts, lower courts, and ultimately, potentially, the Supreme Court, as they look at this, they look to the political branches. And now we have the President of the United States, one of the political branches, saying this is not constitutional. It violates equal protection. It should be to a heightened scrutiny. You've got arguments there from Holder that we should look at discrimination against people who happen to be gay the same way we look at discrimination in the racial arena. That's not the law today, so that's a big step.
But here's the thing. You can decide, as the Obama administration has, not to defend DOMA. There are still consequences to DOMA being on the book, and there are reasons why it has to go away. If you are a same-sex couple and you are married in one of the states and you are now legally married and one of you dies, you face estate tax situations that a heterosexual couple doesn't. Every time you file federal taxes, you are treated differently. It also just says these relationships are lesser, and I think we've evolved to a point in this country where we accept gay and lesbian people as equal, and if we say that their relationships in the federal law are lesser, then we're saying they're lesser. It's that simple.
I think it's interesting to see how it fits into the immigration debate as well.
Certainly. And I think it's probably worth noting that Bill Clinton should maybe take a page from the Joe Biden playbook, because he, after all, is probably the person we have to thank for
about the Joe Biden playbook.
Yeah, exactly. and taking a page from it. Thank you to Ari, Irene, Joy, and Frank for joining me today. That is all for us here. Now I'll see you back here tomorrow at noon Eastern at 9 a.m. Pacific when I'm joined by Bloomberg Businessweek's Josh Green, New York Magazine's Benjamin Wallace-Wells, former DNC Communications Chair Karen Finney, The Washington Post's Melinda Henneberger, and human rights activist Kerry Kennedy. And for a bit of a Twitter tutorial, be sure to follow @NowWithAlex on ye olde Twitter machine.